Morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. You'll note this is the second live of today. The first live was Mablethorpe, so the English Constitution Party, a number of votes. It is quite an interesting one. And then tomorrow tonight I will finish uploading the questions and answers, and then I will upload the English Constitution Society, and then the questions and answers. So there were a number of things that we covered during that previous live feed that went out. Hopefully, people are going to watch that at their leisure. It is the two events covered from the weekend and the questions and answers, etc. But tonight, we are, and again, I have been waiting. I wouldn't say eagerly, I would say to some degree of intrepidation. Why do I say that? Because it's like something you've wanted for years and years and years, for someone to finally accept that this was all happening, and especially in London. It has been covered up in most of the country, especially in England, from the maps, which we're going to show tonight. I'm going to distinctly show a few things. The report is very powerful. It has been professionally written. I'm not going to say anything negative about it at all, even though I know that some people are reading or watching this show and reading it themselves will have their own opinions. I'm not gonna give any personal comments on that aspect. And you all know the aspect I'm talking about. I am pleased that Restore Britain have done that. We, as a group of people, did help to contribute to that report. And again, I just want to make sure everyone understands, one way or the other, we have to get this out. It is getting out there. People are promoting it. From what I understand, it's now been pinned on Twitter, at least, on Rupert Lowe's profile page. It has been expressly promoted by Elon Musk. And as far as I know, there is also going to be a documentary about this that's going to be created and made, and hopefully more people will be coming forward, and even more testimony will be taken about what's actually gone on. So without further ado, let me just bring some more information on there. We're going to bring out some more information on that, but let me just first of all go to this. Now we're on page 19 there. Let me see if we can go back up and click on some of these things. Let's see if I can bring it down a touch and bring the image on the screen. If it goes down, and I'll obviously reset again because it's got so much in the memory of this laptop, it's struggling quite a bit. But just to make sure everyone's aware, the rape and gangs have operated in at least 149 local authority districts across the United Kingdom. And by the way, that massively includes London, which is being completely covered up. Authority districts across the United Kingdom. So, and then you've got a map there that shows suspected and confirmed. So the darker red are the areas where it is absolutely confirmed, and you will see that Northumberland, Carlisle, right away across there, that whole area, and again, it was flooded by the British with these immigrants and using our money to do it. And you'll see all these different areas, especially in the Red Wall, massively in the Red Wall. And who enabled that was the Labour Party and the Labour councils. Again, the Devon area, which you should be seeing on your screen there, you'll notice there seems to be very little or none happening in Cornwall. But what you do see is that. But if you look at the majority of these red areas, they're in England, almost exclusively English, right? And again, there is an element of that which I do want to read out. Hopefully, I'll get to the part that I am going to read out. This is the part that refers to London. The Metropolitan Police review, the National Crime Agency operation, and the witness accounts pouring in proved that group-based child sexual exploitation has thrived in our capital city. This inquiry recalls the failure, without reservation, Khan and the senior leadership of the Metropolitan Police must answer for their role in this scandal until the capital confronts the truth with the same rigour now demanded elsewhere. The children of London remain at risk, and the state remains complicit. Now, that last part of that statement is pretty vital to what's going on. Let me take you to the top of this so everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. The Rape and Gang Inquiry Report, the contents. There's a lot of information to go through. I think well in excess of 200 pages, which I have been reading since it's come out. There's quite a bit of it, and I've got to be honest with you, it's one of them things that it's depressing, but we've waited a long time for this information to come out, and we must read it, because if we don't read it, we're failing the victims by not reading it. Many of these testimonies are from the victims themselves, which I'm going to go on to in a couple of minutes. But you've got the contents, the acknowledgements, forward, introduction, executive summary. So if anyone wants to read a brief of it, I suggest you go to the executive summary and then go to the conclusions. All of it, the whole lot, is harrowing. But what we're going to do at the moment is concentrate on the victim testimony. And I'm going to start to read some of this out because I do believe that we need to get as much of this information out to people. In my opinion, every single alternative media platform out there, wherever you are in the world, should be reading this out and should be going through the victims' testimonies. There are thousands of survivors who could have provided evidence to our inquiry team. Below is a summary of the testimony provided by our brave witnesses who spoke at the inquiry hearings. Some of the witnesses have to remain anonymous for their own safety. Chloe. Throughout her early childhood, Chloe was popular at school, performed well academically, and enjoyed an active social life. Although her parents separated when she was young, she describes her early upbringing as relatively stable. Following the separation, full custody of Chloe and her older brother was awarded to the father, despite his alcoholism. Her mother, on the other hand, was often absent from her life and became homeless following the separation. Chloe recalls a general secure and supportive home environment under the care of her father. However, following his sudden death just before her 10th birthday, she moved in with her mother and her mother's new husband, a man she describes as a paedophile, by whom she was sexually abused. Chloe's mother caught her husband assaulting Chloe on many occasions, but did little to stop it. On one occasion, Chloe's mother caught her husband in the shower with Chloe, and instead of intervening, she closed the door and walked out. At this time, Chloe was 10 years old. The abuse soon escalated to rape. Chloe's stepfather supplied her with alcohol and cigarettes to keep her quiet, and she began smoking cannabis. Around the same time, Chloe started truanting and spending time in a local town centre with a friend unsupervised. She describes groups of Muslim men, primarily Pakistanis, aged 20 to over 50, showing them attention, including wolf whistling and buying them alcohol. Many were taxi drivers who would take the girls into their cars and drive them around the town. At this stage, there was no sexual abuse, and although the men's behaviour was clearly inappropriate, Chloe and her friend, then in their final year of primary school, enjoying being treated like adults. The grooming soon intensified. The provision of alcohol and takeaways was accompanied by emotional manipulation, with the men, many of whom were related to one another, presenting themselves as sympathetic friends to Chloe. Chloe describes this process as them mapping out, are you a vulnerable person? Physical contact, including kisses and massages, became increasingly common. Meanwhile, the abuse by her stepfather at home worsened, and her mother was all but absent as a guardian. At this time, Chloe had an aunt and uncle who lived nearby, and she'd often sought refuge with them. She spent holidays with them during her earlier childhood and felt that she could trust them. On one occasion, she had visited them while truanting before returning home and spending a day there while her mother and stepfather were at work. To Chloe's surprise, her uncle arrived at her house unannounced an hour later, and she invited him inside. After a brief conversation, Chloe's uncle sexually assaulted her. Chloe resisted, and he relented and left. She told her mother about the assault, and her mother reported it to the police. The police accused Chloe of lying, and no further action was taken. Until this incident, she had regarded her uncle as one of the best people in her life. Afterwards, there were no adults left that Chloe could confide in or seek support from. Increasingly isolated, she became more deeply involved with the groups of Muslim men she encountered in the town centre. One evening, Chloe's friend suggested that they travel to a nearby town where one of the men had a hotel room. They were picked up by the man, who was drunk and under the influence of drugs, and taken to the hotel. When they arrived, hotel staff saw them but did not intervene. In the room, the girls were given a potent strain of cannabis, which left Chloe, then 11, absolutely smashed. Chloe's friend was taken into another room by a group of men, and Chloe was groped by the man who remained. Chloe resisted, and he hit her. The man did not attempt to sexually assault her again, and instead threw the girls, both of them were still intoxicated, out of the hotel and refused to drive them back to their hometown. They were forced to walk. It was around midnight. Chloe did not want to go back to her home, as she feared her mother would beat her for being out late, so stayed with a friend. In the early hours of the morning, Chloe was collected from her friend's house by the police after her mother reported her missing. Chloe lied to the police and her mother about where she had been. Chloe's mother grounded her for a month, meaning she was stuck at home with her predatory stepfather, a period she describes as torture. After the month passed, Chloe arranged to see her friend, who boasted that she had a new boyfriend. Chloe left the house to meet her, and the girls were picked up by the boyfriend, who was in fact a 25-year-old Indian man. Initially, Chloe thought the man was a nice, posher than the other men she had met in the town centre. He took Chloe and her friend to the shop, where he purchased a bottle of vodka before picking up one of his friends and taking the girls to a secluded location. During the journey, the men began pressuring the girls for sex. Chloe refused, stating that she was on her period, but the men replied that it did not matter. Night was falling when they arrived, and the boyfriend took Chloe's friend out of the car, leaving Chloe alone with the other man. He proceeded to rape her on the back seat. This incident took place in 2003. In 2022, Chloe took the two men to court, but neither were found guilty. From this moment, Chloe's life spiraled. At 12 years old, she began drinking heavily, smoking large amounts of cannabis, and taking harder drugs, including ecstasy, anything to block it out of her mind. She would drink before school just to get through the day, and her attendance dropped significantly. She and her friend would spend school hours in the town centre walking around until somebody picked them up in a car, somebody brought them alcohol, or somebody gave them drugs. There were times when Chloe would be missing for up to 3 days, during which time she was passed between taxis, drugs, abused and raped. In every case, the perpetrators were Muslims and primarily Pakistani. On one occasion, Chloe was abducted by the abuser, who was driving drunk and taken to a graveyard. He gave Chloe, still 12 years old, whiskey before forcing himself on her and raping her. He withdrew before ejaculation and forced the empty whiskey bottle into Chloe's vagina, where it shattered. Chloe admitted herself to A&E, but no questions were asked about how she had sustained such an injury. She was examined, the glass was removed, and she was discharged. Chloe was questioned by police due to her absence on a number of occasions. Each time she was asked where she had been, who she had been with, and what she had been doing. She replied that she had been having sex with adult males in cars. Rather than opening an investigation and pursuing her abusers, the police dismissed Chloe as a prostitute. They asked her whether she was consenting to the sexual activity, and despite Chloe telling them she did not know the definition of the word consent, they reported that she had been. The police found Chloe, as well as other missing children, in cars with the gang members on multiple occasions, but let the gang members go without so much as questioning them. On one occasion, Chloe was in the town centre and was identified as a missing child by a police officer who questioned where she had been. Chloe told this police officer about the full extent of the abuse, and the response of the police officer was that nothing could be done, and Chloe was let go. In response to her truancy and deteriorating behaviour, the school regularly placed Chloe in isolation and compelled her to attend additional after-school classes every day. This did little to improve her emotional state, and she continued to spend time with her friend and her friend's boyfriend. This went on for a number of years. The boyfriend would supply the girls with alcohol and drugs, as well as introducing them to his friends, who were exclusively South Asian men. On one occasion, he took the girl to his place of work, a textiles factory, where he raped Chloe. Following this incident, Chloe stopped spending time with the friend who, up until this point, had accompanied her throughout her exploitation. By this time, Chloe had become so accustomed to a lifestyle of spending time with Muslim gangs that she continued to do so without her friend. On one occasion, following another late return home, her mother grounded her for 2 months. Fearing further abuse from her stepfather, Chloe walked to a nearby social services office while her mother was at work and reported him. Chloe was interviewed by the social workers about the abuse, after which her mother and stepfather were arrested and questioned. Both denied that the abuse was taking place and were released without charge. Chloe made further appeals to social services and was eventually removed from the house and placed in foster care. She lived with a couple who cared for several other foster children, and she found them snobby and judgmental, found some semblance of stability with them. But it did not last long. She was still living in the same town, so when she went into the town centre, as she often did, both alone and with foster carers, the Muslim gangs would recognise and target her. She remained at the same school, and because she now lived further away, the foster carers paid for taxis to take her there. She would ask the taxi drivers to drop her near the school, and rather than attending, would walk to one of the neighbourhoods where the Muslim gangs spent their time. The gangs would take her into their taxis, ply her with drugs and alcohol, and sexually abuse her. Around the age of 13, Chloe disclosed to social services she was being sexually abused by gangs of Muslim men. In response, social services did not intervene, but rather talked to Chloe about contraception and sexual health. One social worker started regularly taking Chloe to sexual health clinic, where she was diagnosed with chlamydia in her throat and vagina, gonorrhea, genital warts, and pelvic inflammatory disease. Neither the social workers nor the clinic staff questioned or reported this. The police were aware of Chloe's activities, and instead of targeting those responsible for her abuse, they routinely failed to question them, let alone pursue further action. When Chloe was found in cars and houses with them, Chloe was soon moved to a different foster placement with a far more protective carer. On one occasion, a gang came to the foster home searching for Chloe, and the carer fought them in the street to protect her. Around the time of Chloe turned 14, a social worker approached her about her ongoing sexual exploitation. This was one of the first times this had happened, and Chloe was relieved that her abuse was finally being addressed. However, rather than offering a solution, the social worker instead told Chloe that the producers of Emmerdale were looking for a young actress to play a victim of a child's sexual exploitation, and asked whether she would be interested in auditioning for the role, given her experience. Following this exchange, Chloe, upset, angry, and in a state of disbelief, ran away from the foster home, and after being abducted by a Muslim gang, was missing for 6 months. Over this period, she was trafficked across the length and breadth of Britain. She was taken to house after house and raped and abused by guy after guy after guy after guy. The men who abused her paid money to the gang, which treated her as little more than a commodity. She was reported missing, and her photograph was shown on TV. Her abusers remarked on this, "You're that girl off the TV that's missing." But her whereabouts were never reported to the police. Chloe describes a cycle of grooming, rape, and drug and alcohol abuse. This went on until eventually she was located by the police. When the police found her, she was in a car with a South Asian Muslim man. The man was let go without charge, and she was returned to her mother's house. Chloe's relationship with her mother had completely broken down by this point, so she continued to run away, and her psychological state had deteriorated further. Following another period of grooming and sexual exploitation by a Muslim gang, Chloe was taken into police custody and transported to a secure unit at a children's home. She describes the home as being like a prison. Every aspect of her life was controlled and surveyed, and she was routinely subjected to bodily examinations, including full cavity searches. In other words, sexual abuse. Chloe found the experience highly traumatic. She remained there for 9 months, by which time she was almost 15. Social services determined that she was well enough to be released, and she was placed in foster care not far from when she had been living before. Chloe describes the new carers as positive and encouraging presence in her life, and in spite of her proximity to the sites of her abuse and exploitation, Chloe found stability and security living with them. She enrolled in a full-time hairdressing and beauty course at a nearby college, and for the next 2 years, Chloe describes her life as fantastic. As Chloe approached her 18th birthday, social services notified her that the foster care would soon end. They identified a house for her, and after parting ways with her carer, she moved in and got a retail job to support herself. Despite having little experience taking care of herself, Chloe's life remained generally stable through this period. Eventually, Chloe re-established contact with the friend whom she had been abused with as a young child. She invited her over to her house, and when she arrived, she was accompanied by a group of Muslim men, all of whom remembered Chloe from the past abuse. Immediately, Chloe's life was thrown back into chaos. The men refused to leave, and, in Chloe's words, it was no longer my quiet little house, it was their house. They smashed windows, kicked in doors, left the house an absolute wreck, and sexually abused Chloe. One of the men, a previous abuser, pinned her down, pulled his trousers down, and sat on her face, orally raping her on her own sofa as the rest of the gang watched. Chloe returned to drugs and alcohol to cope. Though she was still working in retail, her ability to work was rapidly declining. During one shift, one of her colleagues, someone she was friends with, jokingly pinched her bottom. Chloe, traumatized by the years of abuse, punched him in the face in the middle of the shop. She was brought before management and tried to argue her case, but was fired. Left with no income, Chloe spiraled further. The Muslim gang was still occupying her house, and with nowhere else to go and no ability to remove them, she remained there with them. They routinely drugged, abused, and raped her, including with objects, including soft drink cans, keys, and a baseball bat. Before they started to pay her bills, before long, they started to pay her bills to consolidate their presence in her home. On a number of occasions, they brought young children into Chloe's house to abuse them. Chloe recalls a number of occasions when boys under the age of 18 from the Muslim community were pressured and bullied by their older friends and relatives into raping her. Chloe was forced to commit crimes, including insurance fraud and holding of drugs. On one occasion, she contacted the police to report an assault that was taking place in her house. And when they arrived, Chloe was threatened with arrest rather than the gang members, as the property was registered in her name. One evening, an associate of the gang from a neighbouring town arrived at the house, a notorious sex trafficker, who soon began taking Chloe to bars and nightclubs in the surrounding area. There, he would spike her with heroin before handing her over to men who sexually assaulted and raped her. Chloe became addicted to opiates and her health deteriorated rapidly. She became anorexic, weighing just 5 stone at the age of 18. The use of heroin was a method of control by the gang, as it left her with no ability to defend herself. Physically, her daily existence became a relentless cycle of rape, exploitation, and violence. Eventually, a social worker visited Chloe and was shocked by both her appearance and the condition in which she was living. Concerned for her welfare, she took Chloe to an addiction clinic, where tests revealed an extremely high concentration of opiates in her system. Chloe was prescribed a medication to manage her opioid dependency and gradually weaned herself off the drugs. Around this time, Chloe reconnected with a childhood friend, and their friendship soon developed into a romantic relationship. Her boyfriend became aware of the ongoing abuse and, with the help of his father, paid off Chloe's remaining rent and moved her out of her squalid house. Chloe moved in with him, after which she got another job in retail. For a short period, Chloe's life was relatively stable, but due to her unresolved trauma, she soon returned to drinking heavily, smoking cannabis, and gambling. Her workplace was close to her first foster home, and before long, she came back into contact with members of the gang that had abused her at that time. The cycle of grooming, exploitation, and abuse soon resumed. Her relationship with her boyfriend broke down, and out of desperation, she re-established contact with her mother, who had left her predatory husband, and soon moved back in with her. One night, Chloe was out with members of the gang and drinking heavily. Upon her return at her mother's house, her mother reported her to the police. The police arrested Chloe while she was changing into her pajamas, and she was taken to the police station drunk and half naked. She was kept in a cell until 2 a.m. the following morning, at which point she was released. They did not provide her with any clothes or transportation back to her mother's house. She tried to contact her ex-boyfriend, but he did not respond. Chloe, then 19, was left stranded. She wandered around the neighborhood for 7 hours before encountering a gang member who had previously abused her. Cold and desperate, she got into his car and, for the following weeks, was trafficked across the country. Eventually, Chloe identified a new house to move into. Despite their dysfunctional relationship, her mother agreed to sign the rental agreement as Chloe's guarantor. As Chloe, then without income, knew she would not be able to afford the rent after she moved in, she became aware of the fact that she was the only white British person in her neighbourhood. Every other resident was South Asian. As a result, the gangs discovered where she was living and once again treated her house as if it was their own. The cycle of abuse continued and Chloe's emotional state deteriorated significantly. Chloe was taken to hospital after a suicide attempt, and while there, she discovered that she was pregnant. The father of the child, a Pakistani Muslim illegal migrant, moved into Chloe's home. Chloe was subsequently coerced into converting to Islam and forced into marriage, both to legitimize the pregnancy in the eyes of her abuser and to assist him in securing a visa. Chloe's behavior became tightly controlled. She was forced to wear a hijab. She was prohibited from looking out the windows of her home, and if she misbehaved in the eyes of her husband, he would beat her black and blue. Something that happened every day. Chloe's child was born with multiple health problems, including defective kidney, due to the deteriorated condition of Chloe's womb as a result of the sexual abuse. Nevertheless, becoming a mother gave Chloe a renewed determination to get her life back on track. She reported the father of her child to the police after he assaulted the child, and he was removed from the property. She stopped taking drugs, she was focused, and for the first time, the gangs left her alone. One evening, she went out with a friend who lived across the road. Chloe, now a mother, did not drink heavily, but her friend became heavily intoxicated. A group of Asian men started speaking to them and offered to take Chloe and her friend home. Chloe was suspicious of them, but for the sake of her friend, agreed. Instead of taking them home, however, they were taken to a hotel. Chloe, who was not drunk, protested and encouraged her friend, who was paralytic, to leave with her. Chloe warned her friend about what she was suspecting was going to happen, but her friend refused to leave. Chloe, thinking of her daughter and seeking to protect herself, reluctantly left without her. Following day, Chloe's friend told Corey that she had been raped by the men. This incident represented a turning point in Chloe's life. She decided that she needed to leave her hometown for good and get as far away from these Asian men as possible. By chance, she reconnected on Facebook with a man she had known in her early childhood, an old colleague of her mother's who she describes as one of the only adult men in my life who never harmed me or treated me badly. She told him about everything she had been through and her desire to leave. He lived in Scotland and she was invited to visit him for the weekend, which she did. After returning home, she sought support from Women's Aid, who managed to secure her a property in Scotland. With nothing but her daughter and a small bag, she left her hometown, leaving a lifetime of abuse and exploitation behind, and moved to Scotland, where she resides to this day. Chloe personally knows at least 20 other girls from her area who were predated on the Muslim gangs who predated on by the Muslim abused her. The pattern was always the same: grooming, drugging, trafficking, abuse, and rape. Furthermore, Chloe describes being taken into mosques where imams would describe non-Muslims as infidels and preach that white women who dressed inappropriately were free game. Chloe believes that the local police, social services, National Health Service, and government were all fully aware of what was happening, including the racialized nature of the crimes, but that they did not intervene for two reasons: because they could not be bothered with the paperwork and because they did not want to be seen as racist. Chloe blames these bodies and their major push for diversity for her abuse. Chloe says that if I can save just even one more child, girl or boy, from going through any of this, then I've done my job. Inquiry panelists, do you know how many men abused you over that period? If you had to guess, Chloe, hundreds, hundreds, and hundreds and hundreds. Fiona, so again, this is without me going into any more of this. Is everyone all right with me reading this out, by the way? Give me a shout in the chat, because I'll go through the next one. Let's get to the next one. I am massively at the bottom of this one. 5v5, bless her. So brave for coming forward. No, exactly that. As bad as it is, we need to hear it, DD. Yeah. No, I agree. Fiona grew up in a highly abusive household marked by domestic violence, severe emotional abuse, and repeated suicide attempts by her mother, which Fiona witnessed. Despite exceptional academic ability, she developed serious mental health difficulties. Self-harm behaviours and suicidal ideation from a young age. After escalating abuse and failed disclosures, Fiona entered care at the age of 13. She was placed in a children's home that had already been identified as high risk for sexual exploitation in a television documentary prior to her arrival. Inadequate supervision meant she went missing repeatedly. At 13, she was groomed by adult Pakistani men whom she estimates were aged between 24 and 45. The grooming began with affection and alcohol, quickly progressing to rape, drug dependencies, threats, and trafficking. Care staff negligence was extreme. Abusers would sit in cars outside waiting for the girls, openly converse with the staff, and even phone the home to inquire about them. One care worker told Fiona's mother that her boss had described recording the men's car registration plates as above her pay grade, warning that she would lose her job if she did so. Fiona believes the staff were aware of what was happening but felt powerless to stop it, rather than being actively complicit. Nevertheless, the children's home received £5,000 per week to care for her and failed miserably. Fiona suspects the management avoided proper investigation for fear of being labelled racist. Only the police took any formal action, issuing harbouring notices to the men, official warnings stating that they had no permission to associate with, contact, or house a vulnerable child. However, no further action followed. When Fiona's mother called the police to report her daughter missing and mentioned a history of abuse by Asian men, the call handler told her, "You can't describe them as Asian men because that is racist." I'm going to get onto something else after this one, because I think this is really important that I highlight something that happened earlier. You can't describe them as Asian men because that's racist. You should just be glad your child is being taught a different culture. On one occasion, a police officer returned Fiona to the house where the abuse was occurring and told the men to have fun with her. Let me just repeat that. On one occasion, a police officer returned Fiona to the house where the abuse was occurring and told the men to have fun with her. On another occasion, police instructed the abusers that if they could persuade Fiona to sign herself out of care, the police would stop bothering them. The gang then tried to convince her to do so, intending to traffic her to Kashmir. She was only prevented from leaving the country because she did not have a passport. Between 2008 and 2012, Fiona was repeatedly raped by multiple men connected to organised grooming networks. She was often kept in a house known as Party House, where between 10 and 20 men would attend at one time. On one occasion, she was encouraged to bring her friends because the owner had relatives visiting from Birmingham to celebrate Eid and expected girls to be there. Within the house, the girls were routinely referred to as white slags, while the men wanted Pakistani girls kept pure for marriage. The gang reportedly discussed fears that the English Defence League would arrive armed, so they kept baseball bats for protection. They also allegedly spoke of attending EDL demonstrations with weapons. Fiona was not only trafficked and raped across multiple cities in the UK, but was also forced to traffic drugs. Drugs, intimidation, and violence were used to control her. She was made to clean up the knives from the scene of 2 fatal stabbings. She was present during a shootout. Her abusers bragged to her that they had hidden dead bodies in a certain location. A few days later, Fiona recalls the news reporting on a body being recovered from the same location that the abusers had disclosed to her. As a result, threats of violence carried enormous weight. At 14, Fiona was abused by a man known as Rambo. He had entered Britain illegally in the back of a lorry. Previously castrated in Pakistan as a punishment for child abuse, he had then fled to the Philippines, where he allegedly attacked multiple women and children with a large knife. The origin of his nickname, Rambo, was locked in a room. Rambo was locked in a room with 2 girls and subjected them to extreme sexual torture. This case illustrated that, in some instances, the sexual abuse of children was driven more by humiliation and control than sexual gratification. In effect, he is a psychopath. This is absolute torture. At 15, Fiona became pregnant while in a mixed-sex care home. Her son was later removed and adopted due to the ongoing exploitation risks, yet Fiona herself was left in the same dangerous environment. The abuse continued into her adulthood. It only stopped when she turned 18, leaving her with profound physical and psychological trauma, including post-traumatic stress disorder, substance dependency, and long-term health damage. Fiona states that the greatest harm came not only from the abusers, but from the institutional disbelief, neglect, and punishment that actively enabled the ongoing exploitation. In total, she estimates she was abused by between 50 and 100 men. Of those, only 2 were not Pakistani. Fiona: I was beaten regularly. I was drugged, filmed, being raped, and the footage was distributed. I sustained broken bones, facial injuries, and severe trauma. I was subjected to racial abuse in the community and blamed by families of perpetrators. the rape gang inquiry, Michelle, right? But before I go on to the next one, I just wanted to show you this, right? So this is from Sammy Woodhouse, right? So I'm gonna share this tab and show you it. I want you to see what she's saying there, right? So hopefully you're gonna see that. This morning I appeared on Good Morning Britain in a live interview about the grooming gangs. Before I went on air, I was told not to mention the race of perpetrators. That was this morning, right? Now think about what's just been said in these statements. I, of course, didn't listen. I've now received an apology from the editor, right? These people are complicit. The media are complicit. They are just as much responsible for this abuse and the rape and torture of these girls. Now I'm going to kick this off and hopefully you can hear it. So I felt compelled to show you that. What I'm going to do now is show you another clip, and it's important that I show you this clip because it all ties in to the whole element of what's going on here, right? And it's to do with psychological reframing, which I mentioned. If you go and watch the Mablethorpe presentation, the British called it psychological reframing. Elon Musk calls it the mind virus. But the whole of that is about psychological harm that the media in particular are pushing out on the people, all right? Whether it's to do with the rape and torture of English, white working class English children, almost exclusively, predominantly in white working class English girls, right? Why these people was allowed to attack at will, in effect, the children of England, whilst there were some in Scotland and some in Wales and some in Northern Ireland, you will see from the map it was predominantly England, right? But I want you to watch this. What I liked about that is it concerned Britons, right? Now, I am a Briton, but by the grace of God, I am English, right? I don't mind the Scots saying that, referring to themselves, the Welsh or the Irish. But listen to this carefully. Understand this, from my own knowledge, the problems in Northern Ireland and technically Southern Ireland, and getting groups fighting each other and hating each other was created by the British, right? Meaning the British intelligence system, MI6, MI5, etc., because it benefited them. I am going to play that part again. Remember what I said at Mablethorpe. Remember what I said that we stand for. And one of the key things that I've said for at least 15 years, that those that use propaganda and psychological reframing against the people, in other words, propaganda, and change your minds and put thought processes in your mind, in effect against your will, they should be sent to prison for life. Those people that assist with that are psychologists. They are extremely dangerous people. And it's just as dangerous as sticking a knife in someone. In fact, it's far worse. There you go. So again, I'm just making sure that you get all this. If anyone wants to see this report and retweet it, etc., it is currently online. Let me copy the link. It was sent out today by Rupert Lowe, and many others. Lots of people are retweeting it. That is the direct link that you can see on your screen. You will download the whole report, the rape gang inquiry report, and we certainly assisted in funding that. There was over 20,000 people responded, and all I'm doing at the moment is putting that information out there, and then I will transfer back to some information that people need to see. Let me go back to the rape report. Share this instead. So again, I'll ask the audience, do you want me to continue with this? And I'll read out some more of the testimony. Some people have got stronger minds than others, by the way. I mean this with the greatest respect to the people that got suckered in. The mind virus is the mind virus. It doesn't matter whether it is Britishness, in other words, removing your consciousness as that you are an Englishman or an Englishwoman and we have English rights, etc. Whether it is COVID, wearing masks, whether it is any number of things that they are seeking to use the media. And remember what I said to you before. I think I've said this on a number of occasions. There was a group called the Plymouth Brethren. They were deeply Christian, and they only lived in detached houses and still do. They've got large Christian families. They follow the Christian way. They do not have televisions. They do not have access to the internet. They do not have access to cars or radios in cars, I should say. But my point is that when I said to them, why don't you allow TVs or radio, or why do you not have radios in your cars? Because I used to buy their cars off them and they used to buy cars from me and I used to take the radios out. They said you wouldn't understand. I said, try me. And they said that it carries the devil's word. And I think everyone can start to understand what it is that they were saying. Propaganda is pure evil, right? And to attack someone's mind in the way that the British have been doing for so long, it is pure evil. And that's exactly what they've been doing. So again, returning to this, Michelle was physically abused in childhood by both her mother and stepfather. Her mother had multiple partners throughout Michelle's childhood, many of whom also abused her, some sexually. She believes this early experience created an association between abuse and love, leaving her particularly vulnerable. From the age of 13, she was groomed by 3 adult Pakistani brothers who supplied her with alcohol, cigarettes, and drugs. She was raped while intoxicated, including one occasion when she was taken upstairs while her sister tried to intervene. Because of her upbringing, she thought this was normal, that they were her boyfriends and that they loved her. She would go missing for extended periods and was subjected to repeated daily sexual abuse. The perpetrators would collect her from school, her home, and public places using threats of violence to coerce and control her. At the age of 14, she was gang raped and beaten by 3 men who had locked her in a house. She was left covered in cuts and bruises, which alerted a friend. The friend told her own mother, who then contacted Michelle's mother, and the police were called, but they claimed there was little they could do without more evidence. One of the gang members later forced Michelle to go to the police Can you see and hear me? I apologise. This computer is massively overloaded. Let me go back to this. Now, just briefly, I want to cover this because I think it's important that I do. On your screen as we speak, you will see legislation.gov.uk, right? You will see the Criminal Justice Act 1988, Section 134, torture. This was brought into domestic law after the British ratification of the United Nations Convention Against Torture. This gives you another route into, believe it or not, another jurisdiction, which is the United States of America, to hear these cases of torture against the police and the authorities, including judges, etc., council officials, police, chief constables, judges, prosecutors, etc. And in this document, it tells you torture, section 134, a public official or person acting in an official capacity, whatever his nationality, commits the offence of torture if, in the United Kingdom or elsewhere, he intentionally inflicts severe pain or suffering on another in the performance of his purported performance of his official duties. Right? Now, the crucial part of this, apart from that laying out the offence, you must know that torture does not mean pulling out your fingernails. There is a whole definition, legal definition of torture. Rape, psychological harm, pain, suffering, there's lots of things that covers torture. It's not pulling out your fingernails to get information, right? Care workers, etc. But section 2, a person not falling within subsection 1 above commits the offence of torture, whatever his nationality, if, in the United Kingdom or elsewhere, he intentionally inflicts severe pain or suffering on another at the instigation or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or of a person acting in an official capacity. So if the Muslim Pakistanis are committing these offences and the local authorities acquiesce, so they just let it carry on, or in some cases they've consented to it. The key word here is or, right? Or, not and, or, of person acting in official capacity, and the official or the other person is performing or purporting to perform his official duties when he instigates the commission of the offence or consents or acquiesces in it. Now, there is further section 3, all of these prove guilt, and it's an easier offence to prove, right? It is immaterial whether the pain or suffering is physical or mental, and whether it is caused by an act or an omission, right? Omission means you know it's Pakistani Muslims, you know who these people are, and you have omitted to put it in your reports. You have omitted. In other words, you haven't put it in there. So omission is key because it means you're not being truthful, right? The truth is you either tell the truth or you omit to tell the truth, right? And that is an act of fraud on the people. It shall be a defence for a person charged with an offence under this section in respect of any conduct of his to prove that he had lawful authority, justification or excuse for that conduct. Well, there is in law no justification for that conduct. So then it goes into detail. This is basically this act was and this section was brought in 1988 on the tricentenary of the English Bill of Rights. Right. I'm going to jump to section 6 because some of this doesn't relate to what's going on. But section 6: a person who commits the offence of torture shall be liable on conviction, on indictment, to imprisonment for life. That means it is mandatory, right? Now, the next section of this is the part that can propel you to the United States of America. and this is section 135. This was changed unlawfully, by the way, but we won't get into that. Requirement of Attorney General's consent for prosecution. So if you want to privately prosecute for torture, state officials, you have to ask a state official for permission to do so. And we've done all this with Charlie Staples. Proceedings for an offence under Section 134 above shall not be begun, A, in England and Wales, except by or with the consent of the Attorney General, or B, in Northern Ireland, except or with the consent of the Advocate General or for Northern Ireland. Why is that important? Because we've already been through this process. We've appealed it. We've gone all through it. We went to the High Court, etc., and they would not let us start a case of torture for Charlie Staples. Right? Why this is so important? Because you can bring this case in the United States of America, right? Under the United Nations Convention Against Torture, because it was ratified by the United States of America to allow for this case to be transferred, just in case people in the United Kingdom, the British, wouldn't allow this type of case to proceed against the actual people. So what I'm going to do now is explain something else. In the early 1930s, the British abolished an ancient law and custom of the English. It was called grand juries, right? So grand juries was what they've still got in America, which is a way of us bringing people in, and putting them in front of a grand jury. This is about the probable cause, right? So the first stage of this with a grand jury, the grand jury either can give you a presentment or a bill of indictment. And a bill of indictment from a grand jury is the highest form. You can go anywhere in the world if that person's, left the country, pick them up and bring them straight back. And then they face trial, because the grand jury isn't the trial itself. It is presenting evidence for the jury to decide whether there is or there is suspected and there is evidence of a crime being committed, right? A serious crime being committed by state officials, by anyone, basically. And again, that was removed illegally, unlawfully from our rights and customs as English men and women in England by the British. And it was one of the things that was in place to stop this level of corruption, right? So if Restore Britain's serious, they would bring back grand juries. No odds, but the people will deal with it, right? And again, I'm just making sure everyone knows that. Don't forget to hit the like button. I know it's not a likable subject, but this needs to be spoken about. You do need to get all this information out there. Let me put the link. I think that's the one I'm putting forward, but I'm not sure. Let's put it on there again, and I'll put that one out there. Anyone else out there? St. George 230, hello. Anyone got any other questions? There's so much of this report to go through. It would take me hours and hours to do a full talk through. But one of the things that we do want to briefly cover, I believe, let's see if I can go back to that for a second, which is this part. We'll go, you can either go to the recommendations, which is about 10 pages, or you can go to the conclusions. The conclusions are pretty harrowing in themselves, but I'll bring that out to you. And again, I recommend that people read this themselves, right? This is the conclusions element, right? So the evidence from high-profile convictions and compiled data on group-based child sexual exploitation, rape and torture indicates a clear overrepresentation of Pakistani Muslim men as members of the rape gangs. However, When examining the religious dimension, often inferred from published names in court records and reliable reporting, the proportion of Muslim perpetrators appears even higher than the ethnic Pakistani figure alone would suggest. Analysis of conviction lists, such as those compiled by researchers reviewing cases from the late 1990s onwards, have found that approximately 90% of those convicted in relevant grooming gangs cases bore distinctively Muslim names. A stark contrast to the roughly 6% Muslim proportion of the overall population. And this pattern arises because nearly all documented Pakistani perpetrators in these cases have Muslim names, and additional convictions have involved Muslim men from other backgrounds, e.g., Somalia, Iranian, Syrian, Turkish, and mixed groups with predominantly Islamic names. Non-Muslim participants remain exceptions, often isolated incidents in smaller or mixed groups. These recurring observations drawn from judicial outcomes, inquiries, and other public records establish a basis for advocating improved official data collection on the religion of perpetrators in group-based child sexual exploitation cases. Current national data frequently lack robust recording of ethnicity, and religion is even less systematically captured. Limited evidence-based analysis and responses. Enhanced mandatory recording of both ethnicity and religion alongside other characteristics for suspects and convicted offenders in these offences would enable clearer identification of patterns, better informed prevention strategies, and more proportionate policy interventions, while addressing long-standing criticism of data inadequacies highlighted in government review and reports. The evidence heard by this inquiry is unequivocal, overwhelming, and devastating in its clarity. Organised networks of Muslim men systematically raped, trafficked, drugged, impregnated, and destroyed the lives of thousands upon thousands of British children across every region of the United Kingdom for decades. When the documented patterns from Rotherham, Telford, Rochdale, Oxford, Newcastle, Oldham, Huddersfield, Peterborough, Burnley, Tameside, and dozens of other towns and cities are extrapolated nationally, the scale reaches at least 250,000 victims. This is not a collection of isolated local scandals. It is a national scandal of industrial scale child rape and modern day slavery, enabled, protected, and prolonged by the deliberate failures of the British state at every single level. The testimony of the survivors and their families leaves no room for denial or equivocation. Sally watched her daughter's life unravel. Although her daughter admitted to lying on occasion, the police privately acknowledged grooming, yet in public communication treated her only as a liar. Marlon had his parental authority stripped away so that his daughter could be returned to the very place where she had been raped. Whitney's reports of exploitation were dismissed, while her own childhood trauma was used to undermine her credibility as a mother. Rachel saw her 12-year-old autistic daughter discouraged from pursuing justice, bullied relentlessly, and ultimately driven to her death by an overdose after the authorities failed at her every turn. Fiona, Michelle, Chloe, Marie, Grace, Kate, Anna, Jen, Leanne, Taylor, Jane, Lily, and so many others described the same relentless pattern: repeated rape, gang rape, blackmail with filmed abuse, pregnancies used as weapons of control, miscarriages, coerced abortions, and the birth of children who entered the world already condemned to the same cycle. These were not all vulnerable children. in the narrow sense of the authorities prefer to believe. Some came from stable homes, middle-class families, and loving parents. The perpetrators targeted them precisely because they were unguarded by the collective male protection that some minority communities could mobilise. The gangs operated under an honour and shame clan code that treated non-Muslims, especially white working class girls, as property available for sexual use. They transported victims between towns, shared them among brothers and friends, forced conversions to Islam following unregistered religious marriages, and justified the abuse by describing the girls as easy meat, while white trash or morally inferior. The same networks targeted Sikh girls until Sikh communities responded with collective male protection, while white girls received no such defence. Every institution that existed to protect children instead enabled the gangs. Police forces across England and Scotland discouraged reporting, criminalising victims, destroyed evidence, allowed known rapists to walk free on bail, and in some cases actively participated in or shielded the networks. Social care removed parental authority, placed children in trafficking hubs inside children's homes, and semi-independent units closed cases despite their clear evidence of exploitation, destroyed records and retaliated against whistleblowers. The National Health Service recorded genital injuries, multiple sexually transmitted diseases in a 13-year-old, pregnancies caused by rape and suicide attempts, yet discharged the children back to their abusers the same night with no safeguarding or trauma care. Schools watched older men collect girls at the gates, heard disclosures of rape in toilets, and excluded the victims rather than protecting them. Taxi licensing authorities renewed permits for the very drivers who formed the logistical backbone of the trafficking network and collapsed in the face of organised protests when basic safety measures were proposed. The media self-censored the ethnic and religious patterns. You just see evidence of that earlier. Right, Sammy Woodhouse on ITV this morning. It's still going on. It's disgusting, the level of censorship. The media self-censored the ethnic and religious pattern for fear of being labelled racist. Social media platforms became the primary tool for initial grooming, distribution of rape videos and coordination between perpetrators. Politics, especially the Labour Party, bears the heaviest responsibility. Councillors and MPs sat on the very authorities that covered up the abuse. They were briefed as early as 2003 through the CROP multi-agency group, yet later denied knowledge. When finally forced to act, the Labour government produced a national inquiry whose times of reference are so tightly drawn, limited to group-based child sexual exploitation in a handful of relevant local areas, time limited and deliberately excluding any systematic examination of the demographic, cultural and religious drivers, that it cannot possibly confront the truths that this inquiry has heard. Labour did not merely fail to protect children, it actively obstructed justice, suppressed ethnicity data, voted against a proper national inquiry, and sacrificed tens of thousands of white working class girls on the altar of multiculturalism and electoral arithmetic. The Conservative and Union Party, while in a national government from 2010 onwards, also failed. It did not impose mandatory ethnicity recording, nor did it launch a nationwide statutory inquiry despite the Rotherham J report and other revelations. Rory Stewart, a former Conservative minister, publicly described the issue as a small problem confined to the north of England. He downplayed the national reality and thus showed the attitude of, at the very least, a section of the party. Scottish politics mirrored the same reluctance, refusing a dedicated inquiry and failing to record offender ethnicity. The human cost is incalculable and permanent. Survivors carry lifelong PST, post-traumatic stress disorder, complex trauma, addiction, chronic physical pain, interrupted education, criminal records, lost children, and unrelenting fear. Many have attempted suicide repeatedly, and some succeeded. Others lost their own children to the same failing system that failed them. The gangs used pregnancy as a deliberate weapon of control, and the state compounded the harm by removing babies for adoption or placing them in care while abandoning the young mothers in the environments where the abuse continued. Intergenerational trauma has been institutionalized. The state recorded the injuries, the STIs, the pregnancies, and disclosures, yet chose votes, so-called community relations, and fear of racism accusations over the protection of British children. Whistleblowers who tried to expose the truth, such as social worker Kevin Vines, Tommy Robinson, and countless protective parents, were suspended, bankrupted, subject to dawn raids, asset freezing, and gagging orders. The rule of law failed, and racial and religious aggravation was almost never applied to the few that were convicted. Foreign and national offenders were rarely deported, and sentences bore no relation to the lifetime of destruction inflicted. This inquiry has heard the testimony, it has seen the documents, it has recorded the names of officers, social workers, counsellors, ministers, and institutions that failed. The evidence is now overwhelming and irrefutable. The rape gangs did not operate in the shadows, but with the active or passive consent of the British state. The betrayal was total. And again, it goes on to recommendations, criminal justice response, sentences, immigration deportants and denaturalisation. There's many parts of that which I will go through, but not tonight. So again, it's extremely difficult, even reading through that. It's certainly for something that I've been looking forward to, but not looking forward to because of its content and what's being described, the fact that it's finally come out there. But I will just say this as well. There were many others that were trying to raise this. Nick Griffin, Mark Collette, back in the early 2000s, faced 2 trials and nearly got sent to prison for a very long time for raising these issues. Sam Melia was sentenced to prison for putting stickers on lampposts, literally expressing what anyone would express in a normal conversation. And he was taken away from his wife and children for shouting and for expressing his complete discontent of what the system was doing. Yet these men, if you can describe them as that, have raped all over this country. I'm being very, very restrained in my response to this, but I will put it as plainly as I can. We need to return England to the common law and the Constitution. Deportations is another way of saying banishment, which was standard in England. So and it didn't matter what colour you was. Most of the people who got banished from England were white. But it meant that if you was harmful to our communities, harmful to our nation, England, you would be banished from England, never to return. And if you returned, you would be executed, hanged, right? In some places of England, you would have been guillotined. My personal views on all of those associated with these cases, that they should be tried, they should be sentenced to execution, and that includes prime ministers, ministers, judges, potentially even part monarchy. But unless you show the people there is accountability, and unless you show the people through English history and law that these people won't get away with that, and I think everyone should understand that these people need to be held accountable. And the primary people involved with this, without any doubts whatsoever, are the Labour Party and the Fabian Society. The Labour Party and the Fabian Society were created to control and coerce the working class people of this country. And I hope that everyone who's out there understands that now, right? And you start to trust others that are not politicians, but speak about your rights and justice as normal individuals, right? And that we pick up the mantle and keep pushing forward. But there does need to be a day of reckoning. One thing that we must not do is resort to violence. Anyone in Makerfield must go out and vote for Rebecca Shepherd of Restore Britain. I believe that she understands completely what the job of a Member of Parliament is, and if she doesn't, I'm sure enough people will be giving her a prod, and we have many members in that area, right? Some of which have been messaging me today, for example. We chose not to stand there because we want Restore Britain to restore the English Constitution, to restore justice. And that's exactly what should happen. So unless there is any other questions from this wonderful audience that's tuned in, don't forget to come over to Rumble. It's important. Rumble is a free speech platform. We are oppressed and suppressed on Facebook, even on Twitter, and various other platforms. I'm an Englishman and I speak of England, and I speak of our Constitution. There should be no reason whatsoever to suppress us. And I just want to make sure that we literally provide justice in these cases. If there's 250,000 victims, we know that there's millions of Pakistani Muslims that need to face justice. And we need really to remove them people from this country en masse. To do that, we need assistance. And to do that, we need to adhere to our constitutional rights. You need to rearm the people. But we do not want to do this as violence against the state. They have the monopoly on violence. You have seen that the police are not with us. They are against us. And we need to act in a calm manner, even though you want to scream when you read this stuff, especially when it's related to children. So that's it. I am going to say good night, God bless. I am going to be uploading some more stuff after the show. Don't forget what I believe in. The Constitution is the solution. If we return England to the constitutional principles and the common law, we will take back this country. And that's all that people really out there need to know. That's it. Good night. God bless. Au revoir. And I've no doubt we will be saying all this again tomorrow with more details. But don't forget, Makerfield is an extremely important election, and everyone needs to go out there and vote. If register to vote and vote, do not abstain anymore. That's how we got into this problem.